As Dr. Emily Harper hurried down Main Street, her phone buzzed with the latest emergency call. "Another stray?" she muttered, pulling up to the address given. Her morning had already been a whirlwind of house calls, routine checkups, and an unexpected goat on the loose from a nearby farm. But what she saw next froze her in place. A golden retriever lay motionless on the edge of the sidewalk, her swollen belly rising and falling in shallow breaths. A young boy stood over her, his face pale with worry. "Please, ma'am, can you help her?" he asked, his voice trembling. Emily dropped her bag and knelt beside the dog, quickly assessing the situation. The dog's fur was matted with dirt, her paws raw and cracked, as though she'd been walking for days. Yet even in her exhaustion, the gentle wag of her tail showed she was aware help had arrived. Emily gave the boy a reassuring smile. "She'll be okay, but I need to get her to my clinic right now. Do you know her name?" The boy shook his head. "I just found her like this. She came out of nowhere." "All right, then let's call her Hope for now," Emily said, as she carefully lifted the dog into her van. Her mind raced with possibilities: dehydration, malnutrition, or worse. Hope's condition was critical, but Emily's experience told her there was something else at play. The swollen belly could mean advanced pregnancy, but it was oddly disproportionate, almost too large even for a dog carrying pups. As the van sped toward her clinic, Emily stole a glance at Hope in the rearview mirror. The dog's eyes met hers, and for a moment Emily felt a strange sense of urgency, as though Hope was trying to communicate something more than her pain. Once at the clinic, Emily's small team sprang into action. Her assistant, Claire, prepared the operating table while Danny, their tech, fetched the ultrasound machine. Hope was sedated gently to minimize stress as Emily began her examination. "She's definitely pregnant," Emily said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. "But this swelling, it's not typical." She grabbed the ultrasound probe and applied the gel. The machine's screen lit up, revealing an image that made Emily's breath catch in her throat. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the probe for a clearer view. "Emily? What is it?" Claire's voice broke the silence. Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned closer to the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "Danny," she finally said, her voice steady but urgent. "Get me another scan from the lower abdomen. I need to confirm this." Danny nodded and repositioned the machine. The screen displayed the unmistakable outline of multiple puppies, their tiny forms wriggling in the womb. But what caught Emily's attention was the odd placement of the pups and, just outside the womb, an unusual mass pressing against the uterine wall. "This isn't just a pregnancy," Emily murmured. Her heart raced as she studied the screen. "There's a foreign object, and it's large." Claire frowned. "Could it be a tumor?" Emily shook her head. "I don't think so. Tumors don't look like..." She trailed off, her focus glued to the image. Then, as realization dawned, she sat back, her face pale. The room felt suddenly heavy, the kind of quiet that makes every sound seem magnified. "What is it, Emily?" Claire pressed. Emily turned to her team, her voice low but firm. "There's something inside her that's not natural, and it's pressing dangerously close to her pups. We need to operate, now." The urgency in her tone spurred the team into action. Emily scrubbed in as Claire prepped Hope for surgery. Danny adjusted the lights and handed Emily her tools. As the incision was made, the tension in the room was palpable. Every movement was calculated, every second crucial. Emily worked carefully, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Clamp," she instructed, and Claire handed her the instrument. The first puppy was delivered safely, a tiny golden bundle that let out a weak but promising cry. "First one's good," Danny said, his voice tinged with relief. But Emily's focus remained on the unusual mass. As she reached deeper, she felt something hard and oddly shaped. "What on earth?" she muttered. With gentle precision, she extracted the object, holding it up for everyone to see. It was a small metal box, tarnished but intact. "What is that?" Claire whispered, her eyes wide. Emily didn't answer immediately. She set the box aside and focused on delivering the remaining puppies. One by one, 5 more were brought into the world, each one more vibrant than the last. By the time the surgery was complete, Hope was stable, and her 6 healthy pups were nestled in a warm blanket nearby. Only then did Emily turn her attention to the mysterious object. She cleaned it carefully, revealing faint engravings on its surface. "This looks old," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Like an antique." Claire leaned closer. "Why would something like that be inside her?" Emily shook her head. "I have no idea. But whatever it is, it's been in there for a while. It's a miracle it didn't cause more damage." Danny snapped a photo of the box. "Maybe someone lost it and she ate it? Dogs do crazy things." "Maybe," Emily said, though she wasn't convinced. The box was too large and too deliberately crafted to be a simple accident. As the team cleaned up, Hope stirred on the table, her eyes fluttering open. Emily crouched beside her, gently stroking her head. "You did amazing, girl," she said softly. "Your babies are beautiful." Hope let out a soft whine, her gaze shifting toward the bundle of pups. Emily smiled and moved them closer, allowing Hope to nuzzle them. It was a scene of pure joy, a reminder of why Emily had chosen this profession. But the mystery of the metal box lingered in her mind. Later that evening, after Hope and her pups were settled in a quiet recovery room, Emily sat at her desk, examining the box under a magnifying glass. The engravings were intricate, almost like a map. She traced her finger over the patterns, wondering what secrets it held. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Claire poked her head in. "How's Hope?" "She's doing well," Emily said. "The pups are healthy. It's a miracle, really." Claire stepped inside, her gaze falling on the box. "And that?" Emily sighed. "That's the part I can't figure out. But one thing's for sure, Hope's story isn't over yet." Dr. Emily Harper sat back in her chair, staring at the intricate engravings on the small metal box she had extracted during Hope's surgery. The clinic was quiet now, the only sounds coming from the faint hum of the equipment and the occasional soft whimper of a newborn pup from the recovery room. Claire had left for the night, and Danny had gone to lock up, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts and the strange object that had become the center of her curiosity. The engravings on the box were undeniably intricate. Emily had spent a good part of the evening trying to decipher their meaning, but it was like trying to read a language she didn't know. There were swirling patterns that looked almost like vines, punctuated by symbols she couldn't place. At one corner of the box, a faint marking resembled an arrow pointing inward, as if inviting her to open it. But the lid wouldn't budge no matter how hard she tried. She sighed, placing the box gently on her desk. The mystery it carried tugged at her, but her primary concern was still Hope. The golden retriever had survived a grueling surgery and delivered 6 healthy puppies, but her road to recovery was far from over. Emily's plan was to run a few more tests in the morning to ensure there were no lingering issues. For now, she needed to rest. Just as she was about to turn off the lights, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing. It was an unfamiliar number, but the area code was local. Hesitating for only a moment, she answered. "Dr. Harper speaking?" A man's voice, deep and gravelly, came through the line. "Dr. Harper, my name is Thomas Wells. I'm calling about a dog you recently treated, a golden retriever." Emily's grip on the phone tightened. "Yes, I did treat a golden retriever today. May I ask how you know about her?" There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sigh. "It's a long story, Doctor, but that dog, she's very important, and so is what you found inside her." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "You mean the box?" "Yes, the box." The man's tone was calm, but carried an urgency that Emily couldn't ignore. "Please, I need to see it. Can we meet?" Emily's instincts told her to be cautious. She didn't know this man or his intentions. "Mr. Wells, I'm not sure that's possible. This is a veterinary clinic, not a museum." "I understand your hesitation," he said quickly. "But you have no idea how significant that box is. It's more than just an artifact. It could change everything." Emily's curiosity flared, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Wells, I'll need more information before I agree to anything. How do you even know about Hope?" There was another pause, longer this time. "I can't explain everything over the phone, but please, Dr. Harper, trust me when I say that dog, and what's inside that box, are connected to something much bigger. I'll come to you if that makes it easier." Emily hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to involve herself in something potentially dangerous or fraudulent. But something about the man's voice, a mix of desperation and sincerity, made her consider it. "All right," she said finally. "Tomorrow, at the clinic. But I'll have my staff here, and if I sense anything off, I'll call the police." "Understood," Thomas replied. "Thank you, Dr. Harper. You won't regret this." As the call ended, Emily placed her phone on the desk and glanced back at the box. The idea that it could change everything seemed absurd. But then again, this entire day had been anything but ordinary. The next morning, Emily arrived at the clinic early. She checked on Hope and her pups first thing, relieved to find them all resting peacefully. Hope's eyes followed her as she moved around the room, a quiet gratitude in her gaze. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Emily said softly, crouching beside her. "Whatever your story is, we'll figure it out together." By the time Claire and Danny arrived, Emily had briefed them about Thomas Wells. She didn't share many details, only that he claimed to know something about the box and would be visiting the clinic later that day. "Should we be worried?" Claire asked, her tone uneasy. "I don't think so," Emily replied. "But I want both of you here when he arrives, just in case." Danny nodded. "Got it. But if he pulls anything weird, I've got a mean right hook." Emily chuckled despite herself. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Thomas Wells arrived promptly at noon. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd spent much of his life outdoors. He wore a simple jacket and jeans, but his piercing blue eyes gave him an air of intensity. "Dr. Harper?" he asked as he entered the clinic. "That's me," Emily said, extending a hand. "And you must be Thomas Wells." He nodded, shaking her hand firmly. "Thank you for seeing me." Emily led him to her office, where the box sat on the desk. Claire and Danny lingered nearby, their presence a silent reminder that Emily wasn't taking any chances. Thomas's eyes immediately locked onto the box. He approached it slowly, almost reverently, before reaching out to touch it. "It's real," he murmured. I wasn't sure it would be." "What do you mean?" Emily asked. Thomas looked up at her, his expression grave. "This box is part of something I've been searching for most of my life. It's connected to an old legend, something my grandfather used to tell me about when I was a boy." Emily crossed her arms. "You're going to have to be more specific than that." Thomas hesitated, as though weighing how much to reveal. "Have you ever heard of the Key of Asha?" Emily shook her head. "Can't say that I have." "It's said to be an ancient artifact, something that, well, let's just say it's not supposed to exist. The key is rumored to unlock something of great value. No one knows exactly what. Some say it's knowledge, others say it's power. But whatever it is, people have been searching for it for centuries." Emily raised an eyebrow. "And you think this box is part of it?" Thomas nodded. "I don't just think, I know. The engravings match descriptions in old texts, and the fact that it was inside that dog, it's almost like fate brought it here." Emily exchanged a glance with Claire and Danny, who both looked equally skeptical. "Mr. Wells, I'm a veterinarian, not a historian. My main concern is Hope and her puppies. I'm not sure how this box fits into any of that." "I understand," Thomas said. "But I believe Hope's journey and the box are connected. There's a reason she found her way to you." Emily sighed. "Even if that's true, what do you expect me to do with it?" Thomas's gaze hardened. "Help me protect it. If word gets out that this box has been found, there are people who would do anything to get their hands on it. Dangerous people." A chill ran down Emily's spine. She wanted to dismiss his claims as the ramblings of an over-enthusiastic treasure hunter, but something about his conviction made her pause. "All right," she said finally. "I'll keep the box safe for now, but I need more information before I agree to anything else." Thomas nodded. "Fair enough. Just promise me one thing. Don't let anyone else see it. Not until we know more." Emily agreed, though her mind was already racing with questions. As Thomas left the clinic, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just become far more complicated than she'd ever anticipated. But one thing was certain. Hope and her puppies were at the heart of it all, and Emily was determined to protect them, no matter what mysteries lay ahead. As the clinic settled into its usual rhythm the next morning, Emily found it harder to concentrate on her routine tasks. The events of the past 2 days, from Hope's emergency surgery to the cryptic conversation with Thomas Wells, weighed heavily on her mind. She'd barely slept the night before, her thoughts consumed by the intricate engravings on the box and Thomas's talk of legends and dangers. Hope, however, was doing remarkably well. By mid-morning, Emily found her lying in the recovery room with her 6 puppies nestled against her. The golden retriever's eyes followed Emily as she entered, and her tail thumped weakly against the blanket. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Emily murmured, kneeling to examine her. Hope's condition was improving steadily, her vitals strong, and her appetite returning. Emily gently stroked her fur, letting the dog's calm demeanor steady her own nerves. The puppies were a picture of health, their tiny bodies wriggling as they nursed. Emily couldn't help but smile. It was moments like these that reminded her why she loved her job, even when it came with unexpected mysteries. Claire popped her head into the room, clipboard in hand. "Emily, we've got a walk-in. A lab mix with a limp. Can you take it?" Emily nodded. "I'll be right there." She gave Hope one last pat before heading back to the front of the clinic. The day's routine carried on, with a steady stream of clients bringing in pets for checkups, vaccinations, and minor injuries. Yet, no matter how busy she became, the mystery of the box and Thomas's warnings lingered in the back of her mind. It wasn't until late afternoon, after the last appointment of the day, that Emily finally had a moment to herself. She retreated to her office and locked the door, pulling the box from her desk drawer. She examined it under the light, her fingers tracing the engravings once more. There was something almost hypnotic about the patterns, as though they were trying to convey a message she couldn't quite understand. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from Thomas. "Have you noticed anything unusual since we spoke? Let me know if anything happens." Emily frowned. The cryptic nature of the message only added to her unease. She typed a quick response. "Nothing unusual so far. Hope and the pups are fine. Still trying to figure out the box." Thomas replied almost instantly, "Be careful. Don't let your guard down." Emily set her phone down with a sigh. She was starting to regret agreeing to meet him. The man's intensity was unsettling, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was withholding important details. But what troubled her most was the idea that the box, and by extension Hope, could somehow attract danger. As she stared at the box, a thought struck her. What if there was a way to open it? She'd already tried to pry it open the night before with no success, but perhaps the engravings held a clue. Emily grabbed a notepad and began sketching the patterns, carefully replicating each swirl and symbol. The process was slow and painstaking, but it allowed her to study the designs in greater detail. One symbol in particular caught her attention. It resembled a starburst, with lines radiating outward from a central point. Around it were tiny markings that looked almost like coordinates. Emily's pulse quickened. Could it be a map? If so, what was it pointing to? Her musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. Claire's voice called out, "Emily, you've got a visitor." Emily quickly covered the box and her sketches with a folder. "Who is it?" "Says his name is Caleb. Claims he's a friend of Thomas Wells." Emily's stomach tightened. Another stranger connected to the box. She opened the door to find Claire standing with a man who appeared to be in his early 40s. He was tall and lean, with a rugged appearance that matched Thomas's description of a life spent outdoors. His piercing green eyes scanned the room before landing on Emily. "Dr. Harper," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Caleb Harris. Thomas told me about the situation. I'm here to help." Emily hesitated before shaking his hand. "I wasn't aware Thomas had enlisted anyone else." "He thought it might be safer to have someone else involved," Caleb said. "This isn't the kind of thing you should handle alone." Emily glanced at Claire, who looked as uncertain as she felt. "Why don't we step into my office?" she said, gesturing for Caleb to follow. Once inside, Emily closed the door and faced him. "If you're here to help, I need to know exactly what's going on. No more vague warnings or cryptic messages. What is this box, and why is it so important?" Caleb leaned against the desk, his expression serious. "The box is part of a set. They're ancient artifacts, created to protect something valuable. Each one is unique, and together they're said to unlock a secret that, well, let's just say it's something people would kill for." Emily folded her arms. "You and Thomas keep saying things like that, but you're not giving me any real answers. What kind of secret? Treasure? Knowledge? Something supernatural?" Caleb's lips pressed into a thin line. "We don't know for sure. The stories vary, but they all agree on one thing. Whatever the secret is, it has the power to change the world." Emily couldn't help but scoff. "You realize how ridiculous that sounds, right?" "I do," Caleb admitted. "But I also know people have died trying to find these boxes. If the wrong person gets their hands on them, the consequences could be catastrophic." Emily shook her head. "This is starting to sound like something out of a movie. I'm a vet, not an archaeologist or a secret agent. Why is this my problem?" "Because you found it," Caleb said simply. "And because that dog, Hope. She's part of this too. Her condition, the way she ended up on your doorstep, it's not a coincidence. Emily opened her mouth to argue, but stopped herself. Deep down, she knew Caleb had a point. The series of events that had brought Hope and the box into her life were too unusual to dismiss as random. "All right," she said finally. "Let's say I believe you. What happens now?" Caleb's expression softened slightly. "For now, we keep the box safe and try to learn more about its origins. Thomas and I have access to some old records that might help. In the meantime, you need to watch out for anyone asking questions about Hope or the box. If someone shows up claiming to be an authority, call me or Thomas immediately." Emily nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But if this turns out to be some elaborate hoax, I'm holding both of you accountable." Caleb chuckled. "Fair enough." After he left, Emily sat at her desk, staring at the folder covering the box. Her life had taken a strange and unexpected turn, and she had no idea where it would lead. But one thing was certain. She couldn't walk away from this, not with Hope and her pups depending on her. That night, as she locked up the clinic, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The street was quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. She glanced over her shoulder, but saw nothing unusual. Still, the sensation lingered, a subtle reminder that her life was no longer as simple as it had been just days ago. The next few days at the clinic passed in a blur. Emily kept busy with appointments, surgeries, and checkups, but no amount of work could distract her from the mounting tension in her life. The box sat locked in her office drawer, untouched since her conversation with Caleb. She'd decided it was best not to open it again until she knew more about what she was dealing with. Still, her curiosity gnawed at her. Hope and her puppies continued to thrive, becoming a bright spot in an otherwise confusing and nerve-wracking week. The golden retriever had begun regaining her strength, her tail wagging more enthusiastically each time Emily entered the recovery room. The puppies were growing fast, their tiny yips and playful antics filling the clinic with a warmth that even Emily's most difficult clients couldn't help but smile at. It was during one of these moments, as Emily watched Hope gently nudge her pups toward their bowl of softened kibble, that Claire interrupted her with a hesitant knock on the doorframe. "Emily? There's someone here asking about the box," Claire said, her voice low. Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Who is it?" "He says he's with the Historical Society," Claire replied. "But he doesn't have an appointment, and he's being, well, a little pushy." Emily's mind raced. Could this be one of the dangerous people Caleb had warned her about? "Where is he now?" "In the waiting area. I told him you were busy, but he's insisting it's urgent." Emily took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "All right, I'll handle it. Stay close, though." She followed Claire to the front of the clinic, where a man in his late 30s was pacing near the reception desk. He wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase, his polished appearance at odds with the casual, pet-friendly atmosphere of the clinic. When he spotted Emily, he stopped pacing and offered a strained smile. "Dr. Harper, I presume," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Richard Lennox with the New England Historical Society." Emily shook his hand cautiously. "Mr. Lennox, I understand you're here about the box." "That's correct," he said, his tone brisk. "We recently learned about a significant artifact that may have come into your possession. I'm here to verify its authenticity and ensure it's properly cataloged and preserved." Emily's eyes narrowed. "How did you learn about the box?" Lennox hesitated, then offered another tight smile. "Word travels fast in our field. Items of historical importance tend to attract attention." She didn't buy his explanation for a second. I'm sorry, Mr. Lennox, but I can't help you. The box is part of an ongoing investigation, and I've been advised not to release it to anyone. Lennox's expression darkened. Dr. Harper, I understand your concern, but this artifact is too valuable to be left in the hands of someone without the proper expertise. If you'll allow me to examine it, I can provide a formal appraisal and arrange for its safe transfer to a museum. I'm afraid that's not possible, Emily said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients to attend to. Lennox's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he slipped a business card from his pocket and placed it on the counter. If you change your mind, you know where to reach me. As soon as he left, Emily grabbed the card and studied it. The logo and contact information seemed legitimate, but something about the encounter didn't sit right with her. She tucked the card into her pocket and returned to her office, her mind racing. She called Caleb immediately. He answered on the second ring. Emily? Everything all right? I just had a visit from someone claiming to be with the Historical Society, she said. He wanted the box, said it needed to be cataloged and preserved. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Did you give it to him? Caleb asked. Of course not, but he was very insistent. Should I be worried? Yes, Caleb said without hesitation. These people, they're not who they claim to be. They'll say whatever it takes to get what they want. You need to be careful, Emily. Don't trust anyone who comes asking about the box. Emily rubbed her temples. This is getting out of hand. I'm not equipped to deal with this kind of thing. You're doing fine, Caleb said. Just keep the box secure and stay vigilant. I'll see if I can find out who this Lennox guy really is. After hanging up, Emily locked the box in a secure cabinet and double-checked the clinic's security system. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn deeper into something far beyond her control. That night, she had trouble sleeping. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside her window, set her on edge. She kept a flashlight and her phone within arm's reach, half expecting another uninvited visitor to appear. The next morning, Emily arrived at the clinic early, eager to check on Hope and her puppies. She found them exactly as she'd left them, healthy, happy, and completely unaware of the chaos surrounding them. Hope's gentle eyes seemed to reassure Emily, as if the dog understood everything and was telling her it would be okay. Later that day, Caleb called with an update. I did some digging on Lennox, he said. Turns out he's not affiliated with any historical society. He's a freelance artifact hunter with a reputation for working with less than reputable clients. Emily's stomach churned. So he's after the box for himself? Most likely, Caleb said. And if he's involved, there are probably others watching too. You need to be extra careful from now on. Emily spent the rest of the day on high alert, her nerves fraying with each passing hour. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, though every time she glanced outside, the street appeared empty. By the time she closed the clinic for the night, she was utterly exhausted. As she locked the front door, a movement in the shadows caught her eye. Her heart pounded as she scanned the area, but whatever she'd seen was gone. Shaking her head, she told herself she was imagining things and headed to her car. But the sense of unease followed her home. She checked all the locks on her doors and windows twice before settling in for the night. Sleep didn't come easily, her mind replaying every strange encounter and unanswered question. The next morning brought a welcome distraction. A local reporter, having heard about Hope's remarkable recovery and her 6 adorable puppies, had asked to do a feature story on the clinic. Emily agreed, hoping the positive attention would help her focus on the work she loved rather than the mounting mystery of the box. The reporter, a cheerful woman named Megan, arrived with a cameraman and spent the morning interviewing Emily and filming Hope and the puppies. The golden retriever seemed to bask in the attention, her tail wagging as Megan scratched behind her ears. "So, what's next for Hope and her pups?" Megan asked as the interview wrapped up. "We'll keep them here until the puppies are old enough to be adopted," Emily said. "Then we'll find loving homes for all of them." The story aired that evening, bringing a surge of goodwill from the community. The clinic's phone rang non-stop with people offering to donate supplies or adopt one of the puppies. For the first time in days, Emily felt a sense of normalcy return. But as she watched the segment on her television, something caught her eye. In the background of one of the shots, a man stood near the clinic's entrance, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He wasn't anyone Emily recognized, and his presence seemed out of place. Her phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "We need to talk. Call me as soon as you can." Emily's heart sank. The momentary reprieve brought by the story had vanished, replaced by the gnawing sense that the danger surrounding the box was far from over. Emily stared at her phone, Caleb's message glaring at her from the screen. It wasn't the first time she'd felt this creeping sense of dread over the past week, but this time it felt different, more urgent. She quickly locked up the clinic and headed home, unable to shake the image of the man in the baseball cap lingering outside her clinic during the news segment. Once home, Emily called Caleb. The line barely rang once before he picked up. "Emily," he said, his voice tense. "Are you alone?" "Yes," she replied, glancing around her living room as if to confirm. "What's going on?" "I found out more about the people after the box," Caleb said. "They're not just artifact hunters. They're part of an organized group, a network that's been searching for these artifacts for decades. The man you saw, Richard Lennox? He's a key player, but he's far from the only one." Emily sank onto her couch. "So what do I do? I'm a veterinarian, Caleb. I didn't sign up for this." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry you've been dragged into it. But the fact is you have something they want, and they won't stop until they get it. You need to take precautions." "Like what?" Emily asked, her voice edged with frustration. "Do I lock the box in a safe? Hire a security team? I can barely keep up with my day-to-day life as it is." Caleb hesitated. "There's more to this than just keeping the box secure. You need to understand what it is and why it's so important. Knowledge is your best defense." Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "And how am I supposed to do that?" "I've been working on tracking down some documents that might help," Caleb said. "There are old texts that reference these artifacts and their significance. I'll bring you everything I've found tomorrow. In the meantime, don't let the box out of your sight, and stay alert. If anyone else shows up asking questions, call me immediately." Emily agreed, though the unease in her chest lingered long after they hung up. She checked all the locks on her doors and windows before heading to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept replaying the events of the past week, from Hope's collapse on the street to the ominous warnings from Caleb and Thomas. The next morning, Emily arrived at the clinic early. She went straight to the recovery room to check on Hope and her puppies. The sight of them always brought her a sense of calm, and today was no exception. Hope greeted her with a wagging tail and a soft whine, while the puppies squirmed and nursed contentedly. "Good morning, sweet girl," Emily said, crouching beside the pen. "How are we feeling today?" Hope licked Emily's hand in response, her eyes filled with trust. It was moments like these that reminded Emily why she'd chosen this career in the first place. No matter how chaotic her life had become, she couldn't ignore the joy and fulfillment her work brought her. Claire arrived not long after, her cheerful demeanor a welcome contrast to Emily's anxious mood. "Morning, boss," she said, setting her bag down. "How's Hope?" "She's doing great," Emily replied. "The pups are thriving, too." "Good to hear," Claire said. "Anything I should know about today?" Emily hesitated, then decided against burdening Claire with the details of her conversation with Caleb. Just the usual. We've got a few appointments this morning and a surgery this afternoon. Nothing out of the ordinary. As the day progressed, Emily found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, her anxiety growing with each passing hour. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, though she saw no sign of anyone suspicious. By the time the clinic closed for the day, she was mentally and physically exhausted. That evening, Caleb arrived at Emily's house with a folder full of documents. He spread them out on her dining table, his expression serious. "These are copies of everything I could find," he said. "Some of it's pretty old, so it might take a while to piece everything together. But the gist of it is this. The artifacts, including your box, are believed to be part of a set created centuries ago. They were designed to protect something called the Key of Asha." Emily raised an eyebrow. "The Key of Asha. That's what Thomas mentioned too. What is it?" "Nobody knows for sure," Caleb admitted. "The stories vary. Some say it's a literal key that unlocks a hidden treasure. Others think it's a metaphor for something more abstract, like knowledge or power. Whatever it is, people have been searching for it for centuries. And those who find pieces of the set often end up in trouble." Emily leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "So what am I supposed to do? Just hold on to this box and hope no one comes after me?" "For now, yes," Caleb said. "But we also need to figure out why the box was inside Hope in the first place. That's not a coincidence." Emily glanced toward the folder of documents. "Do these give any clues?" "Maybe," Caleb said. "But it'll take time to go through everything. In the meantime, we need to keep a low profile and avoid drawing attention." Emily nodded, though the weight of the situation felt heavier than ever. She couldn't help but wonder if her life would ever return to normal, or if she was now permanently entangled in a mystery she hadn't asked for. The following morning, Emily arrived at the clinic to find the front door slightly ajar. Her heart leapt into her throat as she cautiously stepped inside. The reception area appeared untouched, but a faint noise coming from her office set her nerves on edge. She grabbed a nearby broom for protection and slowly pushed the office door open. Inside, a man in dark clothing was rummaging through her desk drawers. He froze when he saw her, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking. The man didn't answer. Instead, he lunged for her, knocking the broom from her hands and sending her stumbling backward. Emily screamed as he bolted past her and out the front door, disappearing into the night. Claire and Danny, who had just arrived for their shifts, found Emily moments later, shaken but unharmed. "What happened?" Claire asked, helping her to a chair. "Someone broke in," Emily said, her voice trembling. "He was looking for the box." The police were called, and a report was filed, but Emily knew it wouldn't be enough to deter whoever was after the artifact. She called Caleb as soon as the officers left, relaying the events of the morning. "This is escalating faster than I expected," Caleb said grimly. "You need to get out of there, Emily. It's not safe." "And go where?" she asked. "This is my home, my clinic. I can't just leave." "You might not have a choice," Caleb said. "Pack what you need and stay somewhere else for a few days. I'll come up with a plan in the meantime." Reluctantly, Emily agreed. She packed a bag that evening, leaving the box locked in her safe, and arranged for Claire and Danny to handle the clinic in her absence. As she drove away from her house, a sense of unease settled over her. She didn't know where this path would lead, but one thing was clear. Her life would never be the same again. Emily spent the first night away from her home at a modest bed and breakfast on the outskirts of town. She had chosen the location for its anonymity, hoping that whoever was after the box wouldn't think to look for her there. But even in the cozy, well-kept room, sleep eluded her. The events of the past week replayed endlessly in her mind, leaving her restless and on edge. The next morning, Caleb called to check in. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I've been better," Emily admitted. "I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to show up. I've never felt so vulnerable." "You're not alone in this," Caleb reassured her. "We'll figure it out. I've been digging deeper into the documents and might have a lead on why the box is so important. Can I come by later to talk about it?" Emily hesitated, then agreed. "All right, I'm at the Briarwood Inn, room 203. Caleb promised to arrive by mid-afternoon, leaving Emily with a few hours to kill. She decided to visit a nearby coffee shop, thinking a change of scenery might help her clear her head. As she sipped her coffee and stared out the window, her phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "Hope and the pups are doing great. No issues here. Let me know if you need anything." Emily smiled for the first time in days. At least one part of her life was going well. She typed a quick response, thanking Claire for the update, then turned her attention back to the documents Caleb had given her the previous night. She'd brought them with her, thinking she might make some sense of them while she waited. The papers were a mix of photocopied pages from old books, handwritten notes, and sketches of artifacts similar to the box. One recurring theme was the mention of a guardian, a being or force said to be connected to the artifacts. The writings were vague and often contradictory, but they all seemed to suggest that the artifacts were more than just historical relics. They were pieces of a larger puzzle, each playing a role in protecting something of great importance. Emily's thoughts were interrupted when she noticed a man seated a few tables away, his gaze fixed on her. He was middle-aged, with a scruffy beard and a weathered jacket. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, but the encounter left her uneasy. She gathered her things and left the coffee shop, her heart racing as she walked back to the inn. By the time Caleb arrived, Emily was on edge. She recounted the incident at the coffee shop, her voice tinged with paranoia. "Do you think I'm being followed?" Caleb frowned. "It's possible. These people are persistent, and they're not afraid to use intimidation tactics. We need to be careful." He laid out a new set of documents on the small table in her room. "I've been focusing on the guardian aspect," he said. "It's mentioned in almost every account tied to the artifacts. Some describe it as a protective spirit, others as a physical being. Either way, it's always connected to the safety of the artifacts." Emily studied the notes, her brow furrowing. "So, what does that mean for us? Does the box have a guardian?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Caleb said. "If the guardian exists, it might explain why Hope had the box. Maybe she's tied to it in some way. It could also mean we're not entirely on our own. The guardian might be on our side." Emily shook her head, struggling to process it all. "This is getting more unbelievable by the second." "I know," Caleb said gently. "But the more we understand, the better equipped we'll be to handle whatever's coming." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Emily froze, her eyes darting to Caleb. "Were you expecting anyone?" He shook his head, rising cautiously. "Stay here." Caleb approached the door and peered through the peephole. He turned back to Emily, his expression tense. "It's Thomas." Emily's confusion deepened as Caleb opened the door to reveal Thomas Wells, looking more haggard than she'd ever seen him. His usually sharp appearance was replaced by rumpled clothes and dark circles under his eyes. "Thomas," Caleb said, his tone wary. "What are you doing here?" Thomas stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I had to warn you, he said, his voice low. Things are escalating faster than I expected. The group after the box, they're closing in. Emily's patience snapped. Why does everyone keep saying that without giving me any real answers? Who are these people, and why is this box so important? Thomas sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. They call themselves the Order of the Shard. They're an underground network of collectors and mercenaries who specialize in acquiring rare and powerful artifacts. For them, the box isn't just a treasure, it's a key to something far bigger. The key of Asha, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas nodded. Exactly. They believe the key will grant them unimaginable power, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to get it. Caleb crossed his arms. So why haven't you told us this before? Why all the secrecy? Because I thought I could handle it on my own, Thomas admitted. But I was wrong. They're more organized and dangerous than I realized. You're both in over your heads, and I didn't want to drag you deeper into this than you already are. Emily felt a mix of anger and gratitude. She hated being kept in the dark, but she couldn't deny that Thomas's intentions seemed genuine. So what do we do now? Thomas glanced at Caleb, then back at Emily. We need to move the box. It's too dangerous to keep it here. I have a secure location where we can hide it temporarily, at least until we figure out our next steps. Emily hesitated. The idea of giving up the box, even temporarily, made her uneasy. But she also knew Thomas was right. As long as the box was with her, she was a target. All right, she said finally. But I'm coming with you. I'm not handing it over and walking away. Thomas nodded. Fair enough. But we need to move quickly. The longer we stay in one place, the more vulnerable we are. They spent the next hour preparing for the move. Emily retrieved the box from her safe, wrapping it carefully in a cloth before placing it in a sturdy bag. Caleb and Thomas went over the route they would take, choosing back roads and less traveled paths to avoid being followed. As they loaded the car, Emily felt a pang of sadness. The clinic, her home, and even the simple routines of her life felt a million miles away. She glanced back at the inn one last time before climbing into the passenger seat, the box resting securely at her feet. The drive was tense and silent, each of them scanning the road for signs of trouble. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though no cars seemed to follow them. When they finally arrived at the secure location, a small, nondescript storage facility on the outskirts of a neighboring town, Emily felt a slight sense of relief. Thomas led them to a unit in the far corner of the lot. Inside was a reinforced safe bolted to the floor. He opened it with a combination lock and gestured for Emily to place the box inside. This should keep it safe for now, Thomas said as he locked the safe. But we can't let our guard down. This is just a temporary solution. Emily nodded, though the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on her. As they left the facility and drove away, she couldn't help but wonder how long they could keep running, and what they would do when the inevitable confrontation finally came. The hum of the car's engine filled the tense silence as they drove away from the storage facility. Emily sat in the back seat, her eyes glued to the side mirrors, scanning for any sign of a tail. Thomas drove with calculated calmness, while Caleb sat in the passenger seat, poring over the documents he'd brought along. So, what now? Emily asked, breaking the silence. Thomas glanced at her in the rearview mirror. We wait and see if the storage unit stays undisturbed. If they've managed to track us this far, they'll come sniffing around eventually. If not, then we'll know it's safe for now. Emily's shoulders sagged. Safe for now? That's all I ever hear. When is this going to end? When we figure out the bigger picture, Caleb said without looking up. We're still missing key information. These documents, they're incomplete. There are references to other artifacts, other guardians, but nothing concrete. Emily leaned back, staring at the ceiling. And all of this started with Hope. I can't believe a stray dog could be tied to something so dangerous. Caleb finally looked up, his expression thoughtful. Maybe it's not a coincidence. Hope showing up when she did, with the box inside her, might be the Guardian's way of protecting the artifact. Dogs have been associated with guardianship and loyalty for centuries. It's possible she was chosen for a reason. Chosen, Emily repeated, the word sitting uncomfortably in her mind. That's a nice thought, but it doesn't make this any easier. The conversation trailed off as the car turned onto a quiet road leading back to town. Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a message from Claire. Everything's fine here. Hope's in great spirits. No signs of trouble. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She typed a quick reply, thanking Claire for the update, and tucked her phone away. The reminder that Hope and her puppies were safe brought her a small measure of peace, even amidst the chaos. When they returned to town, Thomas parked a few blocks away from Emily's clinic to avoid drawing attention. Do you want us to come in with you? He asked, as Emily opened the door. She shook her head. No, I'll be fine. Claire's inside and the place is locked up tight. Besides, I need to check on Hope and the pups. Caleb looked uncertain. Call us if anything seems off. We're not far. I will, Emily promised. She stepped out of the car and walked briskly toward the clinic, her keys ready in her hand. The familiar sight of the building brought her a small sense of normalcy. Once inside, she found Claire at the front desk, typing away on the computer. Hey, Claire said, glancing up. Everything okay? As okay as it can be, Emily replied. Thanks for holding down the fort. No problem. Hope and the puppies are doing great. She's even started playing with them a little. It's adorable. Emily's face softened into a smile. I'll go check on them. In the recovery room, Hope lay in her pen, her puppies tumbling over each other in a playful heap. The sight warmed Emily's heart, momentarily pushing aside her worries. She crouched beside the pen, reaching out to scratch behind Hope's ears. Hey girl, she said softly. How are you doing? Hope wagged her tail and leaned into Emily's touch. One of the puppies, a tiny golden fluff ball, toddled over and nuzzled Emily's hand. She laughed, scooping the pup up for a closer look. You're a curious little one, aren't you? She said, holding the pup close. I wonder what's going to happen to you and your siblings. Her moment of peace was interrupted by the sound of the clinic's front door opening. Emily's stomach clenched. She quickly returned the puppy to the pen and stepped out of the recovery room to see who had entered. It was a woman she didn't recognize, dressed in a smart blazer and carrying a clipboard. Her smile was polite, but didn't reach her eyes. Dr. Harper? The woman asked. Yes, can I help you? Emily replied, keeping her tone neutral. My name is Meredith Ross. I'm with the Department of Historical Preservation, the woman said, flashing a badge that looked official but unfamiliar. I'm here regarding an artifact that may be in your possession. Emily's pulse quickened. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. Meredith's smile didn't waver. Dr. Harper, I'm aware of the box you recently discovered. Artifacts of this nature are of significant interest to our department, and it's important that they're handled appropriately. I'm here to facilitate that process. Emily crossed her arms. I don't know who told you about the box, but I'm not handing anything over without proper documentation. If you'd like to make a formal request, you can do so through my attorney. Meredith's expression hardened slightly. Dr. Harper, I urge you to reconsider. Refusing to cooperate could result in legal consequences. Emily's mind raced. She was certain now that this woman was connected to the Order of the Shard. "I'm sorry," she said firmly. "You'll have to leave." Meredith's smile returned, though it was icy. "Very well. But this isn't over." She turned and left, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Emily watched her go, her heart pounding. She pulled out her phone and called Caleb. "We have a problem," she said as soon as he answered. "A woman just showed up at the clinic claiming to be with the Department of Historical Preservation. She knew about the box." Caleb's voice was tense. "Did she take anything?" "No, but she made it clear this isn't over." "All right, stay put. I'll be there as soon as I can." Emily hung up and leaned against the wall, her mind racing. The situation was spiraling further out of control, and she felt more helpless than ever. But as she glanced back at the recovery room, where Hope and her puppies lay peacefully, she resolved to keep fighting. Whatever it took, she would protect them. And the box, from the threats closing in around her. Emily paced the length of her office, her mind racing as she replayed the interaction with Meredith Ross. The woman's polished demeanor and veiled threats had left a lingering unease that Emily couldn't shake. She had faced difficult situations before, but this was different. The stakes were higher, the danger more tangible. Caleb arrived within 20 minutes, his expression grim. "Tell me everything," he said, as he stepped into the office and closed the door behind him. Emily recounted the encounter in detail, from Meredith's arrival to her parting words. Caleb listened intently, his jaw tightening as she spoke. "She's definitely with the order," he said when Emily finished. "The fake badge, the pressure tactics, classic moves to intimidate and manipulate. They're testing the waters, trying to see how much resistance you'll put up." "What do we do?" Emily asked, her voice laced with frustration. "I can't keep dealing with this. It's affecting my work, my life. I don't know how much more I can handle." Caleb placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this," he said firmly. "But we need to stay ahead of them. If Meredith knows about the box, others in the order probably do too. It's only a matter of time before they escalate." Emily nodded, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her chest. "So what's the plan?" "First, we need to verify that the storage unit is still secure," Caleb said. "If they've already found it, we'll need to move the box again, and we should start thinking about a long-term solution, somewhere they can't reach it." Emily's stomach churned at the thought of moving the box yet again. Each time they relocated it, the risk of being followed or intercepted grew. But she knew Caleb was right. They couldn't afford to take chances. The two of them left the clinic under the pretense of running errands, careful to avoid drawing attention. Caleb drove them to the storage facility, taking a circuitous route to ensure they weren't being followed. When they arrived, everything appeared as they had left it. The lock on the storage unit was intact, and there were no signs of tampering. "That's a relief," Emily said, as Caleb examined the lock. "For now," he replied. "But we can't assume it'll stay that way. They'll find this place eventually, if they haven't already." As they returned to the car, Caleb's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Thomas. He wants to meet." "What does he want now?" Emily asked, her exhaustion evident. "He didn't say, but it's probably important," Caleb said. "Let's head back to town and see what he's got." Thomas was waiting for them at a diner on the edge of town. He looked more composed than the last time they'd seen him, but his eyes carried a sense of urgency. "Thanks for coming," he said, as they slid into the booth opposite him. "I've been doing some digging, and I found something that might help us." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and placed it on the table. "This is a map. It's old, really old, but it matches some of the symbols on the box. I think it might lead to another artifact." Emily studied the map, her curiosity piqued despite her fatigue. The faded parchment was covered in cryptic markings and handwritten notes, some of which matched the engravings on the box. "If this map is real," Caleb said, "we're looking at a significant piece of the puzzle. But it's also a risk. If the Order finds out we have this, they'll stop at nothing to get it." "That's why we need to move quickly," Thomas said. "I've been researching the location marked on the map. It's remote, but it's accessible. If we can get there before the Order does, we might find something that gives us an edge." Emily's head spun. The idea of venturing into uncharted territory to chase a centuries-old mystery felt like something out of a movie. But this wasn't fiction. This was her life, and the stakes were all too real. "When would we go?" she asked, surprising herself with her own question. "As soon as possible," Thomas said. "The longer we wait, the greater the chance that the Order will beat us to it." Caleb nodded. "We'll need supplies, and we'll have to plan our route carefully. If the Order's tracking us, we can't afford to make any mistakes." The three of them spent the next hour outlining their plan. Thomas would secure transportation, while Caleb gathered the necessary supplies. Emily would inform Claire of her temporary absence and ensure the clinic was in good hands while she was away. By the time they left the diner, night had fallen. Emily felt a mix of apprehension and determination. She didn't know what they would find at the end of this journey, but she knew she couldn't back out now. The box, hope, and her own sense of responsibility all compelled her to see this through. Back at the clinic, Emily found Claire finishing up for the day. "Hey," she said, trying to sound casual. "I need to take a few days off. Something's come up." Claire looked surprised, but didn't press. "No problem. I'll keep things running here. Are you okay?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just something I need to take care of." The following morning, Emily met Caleb and Thomas at a small airstrip outside of town. Thomas had managed to charter a small plane to take them closer to the map's destination, a remote region far from any major cities. The flight was uneventful, but the tension in the cabin was palpable. Each of them knew the risks they were taking, and the unknowns ahead weighed heavily on their minds. When they landed, a rugged off-road vehicle was waiting for them. Thomas had arranged for a local guide to drive them part of the way, but the final leg of the journey would be on foot. As they bounced along the dirt roads, Emily tried to focus on the scenery rather than her nerves. Towering trees lined the path, their dense foliage casting dappled shadows that danced in the sunlight. They reached the trailhead by late afternoon. The guide wished them luck before turning back, leaving the trio alone in the wilderness. With the map in hand, Thomas led the way, his confident stride a stark contrast to Emily's cautious steps. "How much farther?" she asked as they climbed a steep incline. "Not far," Thomas replied. "If the map's accurate, we should reach the site by nightfall." The hike was grueling, but the promise of answers kept Emily moving. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they arrived at a clearing marked by a cluster of ancient stone pillars. The air felt heavy, charged with a sense of history and mystery. "This is it," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is what the map was leading us to." Emily stepped closer, her flashlight illuminating the intricate carvings on the pillars. Symbols identical to those on the box adorned the stones, their meanings just out of reach. Caleb began snapping photos, his excitement evident. But their moment of awe was cut short by the sound of rustling in the underbrush. Emily's heart raced as she turned toward the noise, her flashlight slicing through the darkness. A figure emerged, cloaked in shadow, followed by another and another. "We've got company," Caleb said, his voice tense. The Order had found them. Emily's breath hitched as she took a step back, her flashlight shaking in her trembling hand. The figures emerging from the shadows moved with a deliberate purpose, their faces partially obscured by the hoods of dark cloaks. Thomas, Caleb, and Emily exchanged tense glances, each understanding without words that they were vastly outnumbered. "Stay calm," Thomas murmured, his voice barely audible. He slowly raised his hands in a gesture of non-aggression. "We don't want any trouble." A man stepped forward, taller than the others, his posture exuding authority. His face was partially illuminated by the beams of their flashlights, revealing sharp, angular features and piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through Emily. "You're trespassing," the man said, his voice cold and steady. "This is sacred ground. You shouldn't be here." Thomas took a cautious step forward. "We're here for answers," he said. "We mean no harm. We're just trying to understand the artifacts and their connection to this place." The man's gaze flicked to the map in Thomas's hand, and a faint smirk crossed his lips. "You think you understand the significance of what you're dealing with?" he asked, his tone laced with disdain. "You have no idea the forces you're meddling with." Emily felt a surge of anger despite her fear. "Then why don't you enlighten us?" she snapped. "All we've gotten so far are vague warnings and threats. If you know so much, why not explain what's going on?" The man's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment the air between them seemed to crackle with tension. "You're brave," he said, almost mockingly. "Or perhaps foolish. Either way, you're in over your head." Caleb stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Emily. "We're not here to fight," he said firmly. "But we're not leaving without answers." The man tilted his head, considering Caleb's words. Finally, he raised a hand, and the figures behind him stopped advancing. "Very well," he said. "If you truly seek answers, perhaps it's time you understood the gravity of what you've stumbled into." He gestured for them to follow, turning and walking toward the stone pillars. The others stepped aside to create a narrow path, their expressions unreadable. Emily hesitated, but Thomas gave her a subtle nod, encouraging her to move forward. She tightened her grip on the flashlight and fell into step behind the man, Caleb and Thomas close behind. They stopped at the largest pillar, where intricate carvings spiraled upward, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The man placed a hand on the stone, his fingers tracing the symbols with a reverence that made Emily's skin prickle. "These artifacts," he began, "are part of a protective network. Together they shield something ancient and powerful, something that must never fall into the wrong hands." "The key of Asha," Thomas said, his voice low. The man nodded. "Yes, but it is not merely a key. It is a conduit, a source of energy and knowledge that could reshape the world. Those who created it understood its potential for both creation and destruction, which is why they hid it and placed guardians to protect it." Emily's mind raced as she tried to process his words. "And the box?" she asked. "What does it have to do with all of this?" "The box is one of several vessels," the man explained. "Each contains a fragment of the key's power. Individually, they are incomplete, but together, they form a map to the key's location. The carvings on the box you possess are a piece of the puzzle." Caleb frowned. "If these artifacts are so dangerous, why not destroy them?" The man's expression darkened. "Because their destruction would release the energy within, causing devastation beyond comprehension. The artifacts must remain intact and separate." "And the Order of the Shard?" Thomas asked. "What do they want?" "Power," the man said simply. "They seek the key to bend the world to their will. They believe themselves worthy of its secrets, but their arrogance blinds them to the consequences." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "So what do we do?" The man turned to her, his gaze intense. "You protect the artifact. Keep it hidden. And you stay out of the Order's reach. They will stop at nothing to claim what you have." Thomas stepped forward. "We need more than just warnings. If the Order is as dangerous as you say, we need allies. Help us." The man studied him for a long moment before nodding. "There is a sanctuary not far from here. It is protected by those who share our purpose. They can offer you guidance and safety, but reaching it will not be easy." He handed Thomas a small, engraved medallion. "This will mark you as allies. Show it at the sanctuary gates, and they will let you in." "Thank you," Thomas said, his voice sincere. The man inclined his head. "Go quickly. The Order will not be far behind." The group retraced their steps to the trailhead, their pace quickened by the urgency of the man's words. Emily's heart pounded as she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see cloaked figures emerging from the shadows. When they reached their vehicle, they wasted no time getting back on the road. Caleb drove with grim determination, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. Thomas sat beside him, studying the medallion as if it held the answers to all their questions. Emily sat in the back, her thoughts racing. "Do you think we can trust him?" she asked, breaking the silence. Thomas hesitated. "I don't know. But at this point, we don't have much of a choice. If the sanctuary is real, it might be our best shot at keeping the artifact safe." Caleb nodded. "And if it's not, we'll figure something else out. We always do." The drive stretched into the early hours of the morning, the dense forest giving way to open plains. The medallion's engravings glinted faintly in the moonlight, a constant reminder of the responsibility they carried. Despite her exhaustion, Emily felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in days, they had a clear direction, a chance to take control of the chaos that had upended their lives. But as the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the landscape, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The sanctuary might offer answers, but it would also bring new challenges, and the Order was still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The rising sun painted the horizon in hues of orange and pink as the trio continued their journey toward the sanctuary. The drive was long and uneventful, the tension in the car palpable despite the beautiful landscape passing by. Emily sat in the back seat, her fingers gripping the edges of her seat as if bracing for an unseen impact. Caleb focused intently on the road, his hand steady on the wheel, while Thomas pored over the medallion, occasionally muttering to himself about its intricate carvings. "Do we have any idea how far this sanctuary is?" Emily finally asked, breaking the silence. Thomas glanced up from the medallion. The man mentioned it was in a remote location, but he didn't give specifics. "We're going off instinct and this map he provided." He held up a worn piece of paper that appeared just as ancient as the medallion. "The markings align with the area we're heading toward, so we'll keep going until we find it." Emily leaned forward, her eyes scanning the map. The faded lines and symbols were difficult to decipher, but a sense of purpose drove her curiosity. "Do you think they'll be expecting us?" Caleb nodded. "If the medallion works the way he said it would, they should recognize us as allies, but that doesn't mean we should let our guard down." The road narrowed as they ventured deeper into the countryside, winding through dense forests and rugged terrain. The atmosphere grew heavier, as if the land itself carried the weight of untold secrets. Emily's gaze drifted to the trees, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows on the ground. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. After several hours of driving, the car came to a halt at the edge of a clearing. Before them stood a towering stone archway, weathered by time but still imposing. Strange symbols were etched into the surface of the stone, similar to those on the medallion and the box. "This must be it," Thomas said, his voice tinged with awe. He stepped out of the car, clutching the medallion tightly in his hand. Caleb and Emily followed, their footsteps crunching against the gravel path as they approached the archway. As they neared, the symbols on the archway began to glow faintly, a soft golden light emanating from the carvings. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "It's reacting to the medallion," she whispered. Thomas raised the medallion, holding it up to the archway. The light intensified, spreading across the entire structure like veins carrying molten gold. A low hum filled the air, and the ground beneath their feet vibrated gently. Then, with a deep rumble, the space within the archway shimmered and shifted, revealing a hidden path that extended into the forest. "Well," Caleb said, exhaling sharply. "Looks like we're in the right place." They stepped through the archway, the air on the other side feeling noticeably cooler. The path was lined with ancient trees, their roots twisting across the ground like the fingers of some great unseen creature. The faint sound of running water reached their ears, mingling with the distant calls of birds. After walking for what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a wide clearing. At the center stood a cluster of buildings, constructed from stone and wood, blending seamlessly with the natural surroundings. A small stream ran through the clearing, its crystal-clear water sparkling in the sunlight. Several figures moved about the area, dressed in simple yet elegant robes that bore the same symbols as the medallion. One of the figures approached, a tall woman with striking silver hair and piercing green eyes. She regarded them with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "You carry the medallion," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Who are you, and why have you come?" Thomas stepped forward, bowing his head respectfully. "We seek sanctuary and guidance. We were sent by someone who said you could help us protect the artifact in our possession." The woman's gaze flicked to the medallion in Thomas's hand, then to Emily and Caleb. "Come with me," she said. "We have much to discuss." She led them into the largest building, a hall with high ceilings and walls adorned with tapestries depicting scenes of guardians and ancient battles. A long table occupied the center of the room, surrounded by chairs carved with intricate patterns. The woman gestured for them to sit. "I am Lyra," she said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "I oversee the sanctuary and its protectors. If you have come here, it means you are entangled in something far greater than yourselves. Tell me everything." Over the next hour, Emily, Caleb, and Thomas recounted their journey, from the moment hope collapsed on the street to their encounter at the stone pillars. Lyra listened intently, her expression unreadable. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. "You have shown great courage in bringing the artifact here. The Order of the Shard is relentless, and their reach is vast. It is no small feat to have evaded them for this long." "We didn't have much of a choice," Emily said. "They've been chasing us since we found the box. We need to know how to stop them." Lyra nodded. "The Order seeks the key of Asha, but their understanding of its power is incomplete. They see it as a means to dominate, but in truth, it is far more complex. The key is a balance, a force that can bring harmony or chaos, depending on how it is wielded." "So how do we keep it out of their hands?" Caleb asked. "By ensuring the artifacts remain hidden and separate," Lyra said. "But that alone is not enough. The protectors of the key have long relied on guardians to shield the artifacts and guide those who are worthy. Your dog, Hope, may be one such guardian." Emily's eyes widened. "Hope? She's just a dog. How could she be a guardian?" "Guardians take many forms," Lyra said. "They are chosen not for their strength, but for their spirit and loyalty. Hope's connection to the artifact is no accident. She was meant to find it and to find you. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She thought of Hope and her puppies, their innocent faces unaware of the role they had played in this unfolding drama. What happens to her now? She must remain close to the artifact, Lyra said. Her presence will strengthen its defenses and obscure it from those who seek it. But she will also need protection. The Order will not hesitate to use her to get what they want. Thomas leaned forward. What about us? What can we do? Lyra studied them for a moment. You have already done much, but there is more to be done. The Sanctuary can provide training and resources to help you defend the artifact. But you must also be prepared to make sacrifices. This is not a fight that ends easily. Emily's heart sank at the weight of Lyra's words. She had hoped for a simple solution, a way to return to her normal life. But it was clear now that such a path no longer existed. We're ready, Caleb said, his voice resolute. Whatever it takes. Thomas and Emily exchanged a glance, then nodded in agreement. They had come too far to turn back now. Lyra rose from her seat, a faint smile softening her stern demeanor. Then let us begin. The road ahead will not be easy, but together we stand a chance against the darkness that seeks to consume us. As they followed Lyra out of the hall, Emily couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. For the first time in days, they weren't running or hiding. They were preparing to fight back. The moon hung low over the sanctuary as Emily stood at the edge of the clearing, the distant sound of running water mingling with the hushed murmurs of those gathered inside. Despite the calm surrounding her, a storm churned within. Tonight would mark the culmination of everything they'd endured, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay ahead. Hope lay by her feet, her golden fur catching the faint light, while her puppies tumbled nearby in playful oblivion. Watching them, Emily felt a surge of resolve. This wasn't just about an ancient artifact or mysterious forces. It was about protecting the innocent, ensuring that the danger posed by the Order of the Shard would no longer threaten them or anyone else. Lyra approached silently, her green eyes softening as she took in the sight of Hope and the puppies. She's a remarkable creature, Lyra said. Guardians often possess a strength beyond understanding. Emily glanced at Hope, her fingers brushing against the dog's fur. She's more than I ever expected. We both are. Lyra nodded, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. It's time. The Order has been spotted nearby. We must act before they strike. Emily's stomach clenched, but she squared her shoulders. Let's finish this. The sanctuary had transformed into a hub of activity, its protectors preparing for the confrontation. Caleb and Thomas stood near the central hall, reviewing a hastily sketched map of the surrounding area. Both men looked up as Emily and Lyra approached. The Order is camped just beyond the ridge, Caleb said, pointing to the map. They're waiting for the right moment to attack. Then we won't give them the chance, Lyra said firmly. We'll intercept them before they can reach the sanctuary. Thomas adjusted his grip on the medallion, his expression grim. What about the artifact? If they know it's here, they won't stop until they've taken it. We'll move it to a secondary location, Lyra replied. Emily, you and Hope will be responsible for ensuring it stays safe. The puppies will remain here under the sanctuary's protection. Emily's breath caught. You want me to leave? Only temporarily, Lyra said. The artifact must be kept far from the battle. You and Hope are uniquely suited to guarding it. Your bond with her strengthens the artifact's defenses. Emily nodded, though the thought of separating from the sanctuary, and from Caleb and Thomas, filled her with unease. I understand. Within the hour, the artifact was secured in a reinforced pack, which Emily slung over her shoulder. Hope trotted by her side, her demeanor alert and focused, as if she understood the gravity of the task. Caleb pulled her aside before she left. "Be careful out there," he said, his voice low. "We'll hold them off for as long as we can. Just make sure the artifact stays out of their hands." Emily managed a small smile. "You're not getting rid of me that easily. I'll see you when this is over." Caleb nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "Count on it." Emily and Hope left the sanctuary under the cover of darkness, following a narrow trail that led deeper into the forest. The weight of the artifact pressed against her back, a constant reminder of the responsibility she carried. The trees around them grew denser, their branches intertwining to form a natural canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Emily's flashlight illuminated the path, but every rustle of leaves sent her heart racing. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional call of a night bird or the crunch of twigs beneath their feet. Hope remained vigilant, her ears swiveling at every sound. Emily drew strength from the dog's calm presence, reminding herself that they were a team. As dawn approached, they reached a secluded glade marked by a towering oak tree. The air here felt different, still and charged, as if the forest itself recognized the artifact's presence. Emily chose a hollow beneath the tree's roots to conceal the artifact, covering it with moss and leaves. She knelt beside it, whispering a silent prayer for its safety. Hope stood guard as Emily rested against the tree, her body aching from the journey. She closed her eyes briefly, but the sound of approaching footsteps snapped her back to attention. She rose quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for the pocket knife she'd brought along. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Emily's tension eased slightly when she recognized Caleb. He was out of breath, his clothes smudged with dirt. "The battle, it started," he said. "They're throwing everything they have at us. I came to check on you and make sure the artifact is secure." Emily nodded, gesturing to the concealed spot beneath the oak tree. "It's safe for now. How bad is it?" Caleb's expression darkened. "Worse than we expected. The order brought reinforcements. Lyra and the others are holding the line, but we need to end this quickly." "What can I do?" Emily asked, determination replacing her fear. "Stay here and keep the artifact hidden," Caleb said. "If the battle goes south, this might be our last hope." Emily nodded reluctantly, watching as Caleb disappeared back into the forest. The hours that followed were agonizing, each minute stretching into an eternity as Emily listened for any sign of danger. Hope remained by her side, her quiet strength a steadying force. When Caleb returned, the sun was high in the sky, casting dappled light through the trees. He looked exhausted, but relieved. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse. "The order retreated. Lyra and the sanctuary are safe." Emily's knees nearly buckled with relief. She hugged Caleb tightly, her emotions spilling over. "I was so scared," she admitted. "For you, for everyone." "It's over," Caleb said, "at least for now." They returned to the sanctuary later that day, where the protectors were tending to their wounded and repairing the damage. Lyra greeted them with a tired smile, her silver hair glinting in the sunlight. "You did well," she said to Emily. "The artifact is safe, and the sanctuary stands strong. You've proven yourself as more than a guardian. You're a protector in your own right." Emily looked at Hope, who wagged her tail happily and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Their journey had tested them in ways she could never have imagined, but they had emerged stronger, bound by a purpose greater than themselves. For now, the danger had passed, but Emily knew the fight was far from over. The artifact's secrets remained, and the Order of the Shard would not rest. But surrounded by allies and with hope by her side, Emily felt ready to face whatever came next.